My wife says I'm overreacting about her brother who photographed our daughter for 2 years. I found the first photo while fixing Sophia's iPad. The screen had been cracked for weeks, and I finally ordered a replacement, which meant transferring everything to my laptop before the repair. That's when I saw the folder labeled Uncle Trevor's Photography Project, with 847 files inside. I clicked it open expecting generic kid photos from family gatherings, maybe some nature shots since Trevor fancied himself an artist. Instead, I found 2 years of images documenting my daughter in increasingly private moments. Sophia sleeping in her room. Sophia changing clothes with the door partially open. Sophia in the bathtub, carefully framed to seem innocent but clearly calculated. Sophia bent over doing homework. Camera angle focused on areas no uncle should be photographing. The timestamps went back 26 months. I sat frozen at my desk, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. Leslie walked in asking about dinner and saw my face. She came around the desk, looked at the screen, and her first words were not horror or shock. She said, "David, those are just art photos. Trevor's building his portfolio." I turned to look at my wife, unable to process what she had just said. Art photos. Portfolio. These words applied to images of our 9-year-old daughter in various states of undress, captured without her knowledge or consent over 2 years. Leslie's expression was defensive, not concerned. She crossed her arms and said Trevor had mentioned he was documenting childhood for a gallery exhibit about innocence and growth. He had asked her permission months ago, and she had agreed because he needed family subjects. I asked why she never mentioned this to me, why I was never consulted about my daughter being photographed in private moments. Leslie said she did not think it was a big deal, that I was being paranoid and seeing something sinister in harmless photos. She said Trevor was a professional photographer who had exhibited in actual galleries, that he understood composition and lighting, that I was sexualizing innocent images because I had a dirty mind. The accusation hit me physically. I was sexualizing my own daughter by recognizing that her uncle had been secretly documenting her in vulnerable positions for years. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I pulled up specific photos, forcing Leslie to actually look at them. There was Sophia in her bathroom, towel slipping while she reached for something. Another showed her in pajamas, bent forward, the angle deliberate. Leslie insisted these were artistic choices about lighting and perspective. She said I would not understand because I was not creative, that Trevor had explained his concept to her, and it made perfect sense. I asked if Trevor had permission to be in Sophia's bathroom, in her bedroom, taking photos while she slept or changed. Leslie's face tightened. She said he probably took them during family visits, that he was around the house often enough to capture candid moments. I pulled up the metadata, showing her the timestamps. 3 a.m. on a Thursday, when Trevor should have been at his own apartment across town. 7 p.m. on a Saturday, when we were supposedly out at dinner and Sophia stayed home with a babysitter. Leslie went quiet, staring at the screen, her defense cracking slightly before she rebuilt it. She said the timestamps might be wrong, that digital files got corrupted sometimes, that I was reaching for explanations that fit my paranoid narrative instead of accepting the simple truth that her brother was an artist. I saved every file to an external drive before Leslie could think to delete them. Then I called the police non-emergency line and was transferred to a detective who specialized in crimes against children. Detective Barbara Ortiz asked me to bring the drive to the station immediately and to not discuss the images with anyone else, including my wife or Trevor. I told Leslie I was going out and she demanded to know where. When I said the police station, she actually tried to stop me physically, standing in front of the door. She said I was going to destroy Trevor's life over nothing, that police would not understand artistic photography, that I was humiliating our family by involving authorities in private family matters. I moved her aside gently but firmly and walked out. In the car, I called Trevor's phone and left a message saying I found the photos and was going to the police. I wanted him to know I knew, wanted him panicking and making mistakes. Leslie called my phone 17 times during the 20-minute drive to the station. I ignored every call because I did not trust myself to speak to her without saying something I would regret. Detective Ortiz was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled into a bun and an expression that suggested she had seen worse than whatever I was about to show her. I handed over the drive, and she plugged it into her computer in a small interview room that smelled like stale coffee and cleaning products. She clicked through the folder in silence, her face neutral but professional. After about 15 minutes, she looked up at me and said this was extremely serious, that several images constituted child exploitation, that I needed to tell her everything I knew about Trevor's access to my daughter. I explained that Trevor was my brother-in-law, that he visited often because Leslie and he were close siblings, that he was frequently at our house even when we were not there because Leslie had given him a key for emergencies. Detective Ortiz wrote everything down with careful precision. She asked if I had noticed anything inappropriate in Trevor's behavior toward Sophia before finding the photos. I tried to think back objectively, searching my memory for red flags I might have dismissed. There were moments that felt off at the time, but that Leslie had explained away. Trevor always insisted on giving Sophia her bath when he babysat, saying it was part of the bedtime routine. He bought her clothes that seemed too mature, trendy outfits that Leslie thought were fashionable, but that made me uncomfortable seeing on a child. He took Sophia on solo outings regularly, to parks and museums and his photography studio, always bringing her back with stories about their adventures. Leslie encouraged these outings, saying Sophia needed a male role model since I worked long hours and Trevor was stepping up. I told Detective Ortiz all of this and watched her expression tighten. She asked if I knew where Trevor was right now. I said probably at his apartment or studio. She made a phone call, and within minutes, other detectives were mobilizing. She told me they would execute a search warrant immediately, that I should go home and not discuss the investigation with anyone except my attorney. I asked what happened next, and she said it depended on what they found at Trevor's locations, but that based on the photos alone, Trevor would be arrested and charged. I drove home in a daze, the full weight of what I had just set in motion crashing down. Leslie's car was still in the driveway. I walked inside to find her on the phone with Trevor, warning him about the police. She saw me and ended the call abruptly. Her face was furious and frightened at the same time. She said I had just ruined her brother's life over artistic photographs, that detectives were on their way to his apartment, that he was terrified and talking about suicide. I told her Trevor should be terrified because what he did to Sophia was criminal, not artistic. Leslie started crying, saying I did not understand their family, that Trevor had been through so much trauma as a child and photography was his therapy. I stopped walking toward the kitchen and turned back to her. What trauma? Leslie wiped her eyes and said Trevor had been molested by their uncle when he was young, that it had messed him up, that he would never hurt a child because he knew how it felt. The irony of her statement hung in the air between us. I asked if she heard what she just said, if she understood that traumatized children often grew into adults who perpetuated the cycle. Leslie shook her head violently. Trevor was different. He got help. He would never become what his uncle was. I asked when she had last checked on Sophia upstairs. Leslie's face went pale. She ran for the stairs, and I followed. Sophia's bedroom door was open, and she was sitting on her bed surrounded by stuffed animals, playing on her phone. She looked up when we entered and smiled, innocent and trusting. Leslie hugged her fiercely, and Sophia protested, confused. I asked Sophia if Uncle Trevor had ever taken photos of her that made her uncomfortable. Sophia looked between us, sensing something wrong. She said Uncle Trevor took lots of photos, that he was teaching her about cameras, that it was fun. I asked specifically about photos in the bathroom or when she was getting dressed. Sophia's face changed, something shutting down behind her eyes. She said she was not supposed to talk about that Uncle Trevor said it was their special project and other people would not understand. My heart shattered into pieces. Leslie made a choking sound beside me. Detective Ortiz called an hour later. They had found Trevor's apartment and studio empty. He had fled immediately after Leslie's warning call, but what they did find required me to come back to the station immediately with Sophia. I asked if this could wait until morning, if we could let Sophia sleep one more night before her world collapsed. Detective Ortiz said no, that what they discovered meant Sophia needed a medical examination tonight, and that I needed to see the evidence before making any more decisions about protecting my wife's feelings. The drive to the station was silent, except for Sophia's questions about why we were going to the police station so late. I told her the truth as gently as possible. That Uncle Trevor had been taking inappropriate photos, that the police needed to talk to her, that she was not in trouble, but that grown-ups needed to make sure she was okay. Sophia started crying quietly in the back seat. Leslie stared out the passenger window, still defending Trevor in her silence even as evidence mounted. The station had a child forensic interviewer, a kind woman named Ruth Callahan, who specialized in talking to children about abuse. She took Sophia into a soft-lit room designed to be comfortable rather than institutional. Leslie and I watched through a one-way mirror as Ruth gently asked Sophia about her relationship with Uncle Trevor. Sophia was hesitant at first, but Ruth was patient and skilled. Slowly, the full story emerged. Trevor had been photographing Sophia for over 2 years, starting with normal family photos before gradually introducing more private scenarios. He told her they were creating art together, that she was his muse, that famous photographers worked with child models all the time. He made her feel special and mature. He bought her gifts and took her to nice places. He told her some photos needed to be private because other people would not understand artistic nudity. That phrase, artistic nudity, coming from my 9-year-old daughter's mouth made me want to vomit. Trevor had groomed her perfectly, normalized everything, made her complicit in her own exploitation. Ruth asked if Trevor ever touched her inappropriately. Sophia hesitated before nodding. She described incidents that escalated from seemingly innocent affection to criminal sexual abuse. She said Trevor told her this was normal between people who loved each other, that her parents would not understand because they were not close like she and Trevor were close. Throughout the interview, Sophia kept looking at the mirror as if sensing we were watching, as if seeking permission to tell the truth. When Ruth finished, she brought Sophia out, and we drove to the hospital for a medical examination. The forensic nurse was gentle, but the process was traumatic anyway. Sophia cried through much of it while I held her hand, and Leslie stood in the corner looking like she might collapse. The nurse found evidence of sexual abuse. She documented everything with professional detachment while my daughter trembled on the examination table. I kept thinking about Leslie's defense of Trevor, her insistence that I was overreacting, her warning call that let him escape. Detective Ortiz met us back at the station around 2 a.m. She looked exhausted but determined. She told us what they found at Trevor's studio, thousands of photos organized into folders by child's name. Sophia was not his only victim. There were at least 11 other children, mostly relatives and children of friends, documented over 6 years. The photos were professionally organized, categorized by age and type of content. Trevor had been running a child exploitation operation disguised as artistic photography. He sold access to the images through encrypted websites, making thousands of dollars monthly. His entire professional photographer identity was a cover for systematic abuse. The gallery exhibits Leslie mentioned were real, but served to legitimize him, to create a public persona that hid his criminal activities. Detective Ortiz showed us evidence of communications with other predators, discussions of which children were most accessible, advice on grooming techniques. Trevor was not a damaged victim acting out his trauma. He was a calculated predator who used his family connections to access vulnerable children. Leslie finally broke. She collapsed into a chair and sobbed, the reality of what her brother had done crashing through her denial. She kept saying she did not know, that he had seemed so genuine, that she had trusted him completely. I felt no sympathy for her then. She had been warned. I had shown her evidence. She had chosen to believe Trevor over protecting our daughter. She had actively helped him escape by calling to warn him. Detective Ortiz asked Leslie directly about that phone call. Leslie admitted she called Trevor immediately after I left for the station. She said she wanted to prepare him, to let him know police were coming so he would not be shocked. Detective Ortiz's expression hardened. She said Leslie's warning call had allowed a child predator to flee, and that she would be consulting with the prosecutor about potential obstruction charges. Leslie's face went white. She tried to explain that she did not know the extent of Trevor's crimes when she made the call, that she was just trying to protect her brother. Detective Ortiz said intent did not matter when the result was allowing a dangerous criminal to escape custody. Over the next week, the investigation expanded into something much larger than our family tragedy. FBI got involved because of the interstate and international distribution of the images. They traced Trevor's online activities to a network of predators sharing and selling exploitation material. The 11 children identified from Trevor's studio were just the local victims. Images of Sophia and other children had been distributed to thousands of users worldwide. Agent Dennis Vaughn from the FBI's Child Exploitation Unit called me personally to explain the scope. He said they were working with international partners to identify and rescue children who were still being actively abused. Trevor's arrest, when it happened, would likely lead to dozens more arrests across multiple countries. The photos I found on Sophia's iPad were evidence in one of the largest child exploitation cases they had worked in years. My daughter's abuse was connected to a global network of predators. Trevor was arrested 3 days later at the Canadian border trying to cross into Vancouver. He had been hiding at a friend's cabin in northern Washington, planning his escape. The friend, another photographer named Glenn Whitmore, was arrested as well when police found exploitation material on his computers too. The news coverage was immediate and brutal. Local stations ran stories about the respected photographer arrested for child exploitation. They showed footage of Trevor being led into court in handcuffs. Comment sections filled with people defending him, saying police were overreaching, that artistic photography was being criminalized. Gallery owners who exhibited his work rushed to distance themselves, claiming they had no idea. Former clients whose children Trevor had photographed began calling police, terrified about what might have happened to their kids. The investigation identified 7 more victims in the first week alone. The children ranged from age 5 to 13, all photographed over multiple years, all groomed into believing they were participating in legitimate art projects. Leslie's family collapsed into chaos. Her parents, Gerald and Maureen Foster, called constantly demanding to know what was happening. At first, they defended Trevor the same way Leslie had, insisting there was a misunderstanding. When the full evidence became public, when the FBI released information about the international distribution ring, Gerald went silent and Maureen had a breakdown. She was hospitalized for 3 days. Leslie's sister Kimberly called screaming at me for destroying the family, as if I had committed the crimes rather than exposed them. She said I should have handled it privately, that involving police turned a family matter into a public catastrophe. I told Kimberly that Trevor had sexually abused multiple children and asked what private resolution would have been appropriate for that. She hung up on me. Extended family members took sides. Some understood the severity. Others believed the charges were exaggerated, that prosecutors were building a case on ambiguous evidence. Sunday dinners stopped. Holiday plans disintegrated. The family fractured completely along lines of who believed the victims and who protected Trevor. Leslie moved into the guest room. We barely spoke except about logistics concerning Sophia's care. She started therapy for herself, trying to process how she had been so blind, how her brother had manipulated her into providing him access to her own daughter. Her therapist said Leslie was experiencing a form of trauma response, that her childhood molestation, which she had never fully addressed, made her psychologically incapable of recognizing Trevor's predatory behavior. She had normalized abuse because abuse was normalized for her growing up. The same uncle who molested Trevor had molested Leslie too, something she had buried so deeply she barely remembered it until forced to confront Trevor's crimes. Her defense of Trevor was really defense of her own family's pattern of covering up abuse, of keeping secrets, of protecting predators over victims. Understanding this intellectually did not make me forgive her. She had sacrificed our daughter's safety to avoid confronting painful truths. That choice had consequences. Sophia started intensive therapy with a child psychologist who specialized in sexual abuse recovery. Dr. Angela Reeves was patient and skilled, using play therapy and art therapy to help Sophia process what happened to her. Sophia drew pictures of herself in chains, of monsters with cameras, of hiding in dark spaces. She had nightmares nightly, waking up screaming. She refused to be alone in any room. She became hypervigilant about people looking at her, convinced everyone could see the photos Trevor had taken. School was impossible. Her classmates had seen news coverage. Some parents pulled their children away from Sophia as if she were contaminated. Others were overly sympathetic in ways that highlighted her victimization. We switched to homeschooling temporarily. I reduced my hours at work to stay home with her. Leslie tried to help, but Sophia would not let her mother touch her. She associated Leslie with Trevor, with betrayal, with the adult who was supposed to protect her, but instead gave a predator access. The damage to their relationship might never heal. The legal case moved forward methodically. Trevor pleaded not guilty despite overwhelming evidence. His attorney, a criminal defense lawyer named Roger Daniels, argued that the photos were artistic expression protected by the First Amendment, that the sexual abuse allegations were fabricated by a vindictive brother-in-law, that Trevor was being persecuted for creating challenging art about childhood. The strategy was offensive and transparent, but Daniels filed motion after motion, trying to suppress evidence and delay trial. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Linda Cho, fought every motion aggressively. She had built her career on prosecuting child exploitation cases and was known for maximizing sentences. She called me regularly with updates, explaining legal strategies and preparing me for the trial. She said Trevor's defense was typical for predators: deny everything, attack the victim's credibility, claim misunderstanding. Juries usually saw through it when confronted with evidence, but trials were unpredictable. She wanted me prepared for the possibility that Trevor might be acquitted on some charges even if convicted on others. The preliminary hearing was brutal. Trevor appeared in court looking different from the casual, artistic persona I remembered. His hair was cut short, he wore an expensive suit, he looked respectable and calm, playing the role of wrongly accused artist. His parents sat behind him in the gallery, Gerald stone-faced and Maureen crying quietly. Leslie attended, but sat on the prosecutor's side, physically separating herself from her family. The judge reviewed the evidence presented by both sides and ruled there was probable cause to proceed to trial on all charges. 11 counts of child exploitation, 8 counts of distribution of exploitation material, 4 counts of sexual abuse of a minor, and multiple charges related to the international distribution network. Trevor's bail was revoked after the prosecutor argued he was a flight risk given his previous attempt to flee to Canada. He was remanded to county jail to await trial. As officers led him away, Trevor looked directly at me for the first time since his arrest. The hatred in his eyes was pure and undisguised. Discovery revealed more horrors. Trevor had kept detailed journals documenting his grooming techniques, discussing which children were most responsive to which manipulation tactics. He had written about Sophia specifically, noting how her parents' busy schedules created opportunities for access, how her mother's trust in him made everything easier. He had written about me too, calling me oblivious and focused on work, an easy mark who would never question his sister's beloved brother. Reading Trevor's analysis of how he had manipulated our family was sickening. He had studied us, identified our weaknesses, exploited them systematically. The journals would be damning evidence at trial. Roger Daniels tried to suppress them, claiming they were creative writing, not factual accounts. The judge disagreed. The journals were admitted as evidence. Linda Cho told me the journals essentially guaranteed conviction on exploitation charges and strengthened the sexual abuse charges significantly. Trevor's own words would destroy him. The trial was scheduled for 8 months after Trevor's arrest. Those months were purgatory. Sophia's therapy continued with slow, painful progress. She started sleeping through the night occasionally. She stopped flinching when I hugged her. She drew pictures of herself as a superhero defeating monsters. Dr. Reeves said these were positive signs, indicators that Sophia was beginning to reframe her identity from victim to survivor. But she also warned that healing was not linear, that setbacks would happen, that the trial would likely trigger regression. She recommended we prepare Sophia thoroughly for testifying, that we practice with child advocates so the courtroom environment would not overwhelm her. Sophia was terrified of testifying. She did not want to talk about what Trevor did in front of strangers. She did not want Trevor looking at her while she spoke. I promised her I would be there, that the prosecutor would protect her, that telling the truth would help put Trevor in prison so he could not hurt anyone else. Sophia asked if telling the truth would make the photos disappear. I had to explain that the photos were evidence and would exist forever, that nothing could erase what Trevor had done, but that we could stop him from creating more. Leslie and I attempted marriage counseling. The therapist, Dr. Raymond Park, specialized in couples recovering from family trauma. The sessions were difficult and often left us both angry and crying. Leslie struggled with guilt about her role in Trevor's access to Sophia, while also grieving the loss of her brother, the person she thought he was. I struggled with rage toward Leslie for her initial defense of Trevor, for her warning call, for choosing family loyalty over our daughter's protection. Dr. Park said these were normal reactions to abnormal circumstances, that marriages rarely survived what we were experiencing, that our best hope was honest communication and shared commitment to Sophia's recovery. I was not sure I wanted the marriage to survive. Looking at Leslie reminded me of her standing in our kitchen saying Trevor's photos were just art, of her physically blocking me from leaving to go to the police. Trust felt impossible to rebuild, but Sophia needed stability, needed at least one parent relationship to be consistent. We stayed together in the same house while maintaining emotional distance. Other victims' families reached out through the victim advocate. Some wanted to connect, to share experiences and support each other through the trial. We attended a gathering organized by the FBI's Victim Services Coordinator. 11 families sat in a community center meeting room, all dealing with the same trauma, all processing how Trevor had violated their children. The children ranged from Sophia's age to teenagers. Some families had discovered the abuse quickly like we did. Others had been unaware until police contacted them with evidence. One mother, Patricia Lamb, described finding out her 6-year-old son had been photographed by Trevor during art lessons she paid for, thinking she was supporting her child's creativity. Another father, Jerome Atkins, talked about trusting Trevor to babysit his daughters because they were family friends, never suspecting. The commonality was devastating. Trevor had exploited trust across multiple families, used his professional photographer identity to normalize having children in private scenarios, groomed parents as much as children. We were all victims of sophisticated manipulation. The trial began on a cold March morning. The courthouse was crowded with media, victim families, Trevor's supporters who still believed in his innocence, and curious onlookers. Security was heavy. Protesters held signs outside arguing both for Trevor's conviction and for his artistic freedom. The jury selection took 3 days. Linda Cho worked to identify jurors who could view exploitation evidence without becoming too emotional to deliberate rationally, while also eliminating anyone who might buy Trevor's artistic defense. The final jury was 7 women and 5 men, a mix of ages and backgrounds. The judge, Honorable Frances Melbourne, was known for running tight courtrooms and imposing harsh sentences on child predators. Her presence was reassuring. Linda Cho's opening statement was powerful and direct. She described Trevor as a predator who used photography as a cover to access, groom, and abuse children. She outlined the evidence: thousands of photos, detailed journals, victim testimony, medical evidence, digital forensics proving distribution. She said the case was straightforward despite the defense's attempts to complicate it with arguments about artistic expression. This was not about art. This was about a man who systematically abused vulnerable children for profit. Roger Daniels' opening statement was exactly what Linda predicted. He painted Trevor as a misunderstood artist whose edgy work challenged social boundaries around childhood innocence. He claimed the photos were meant to provoke conversations about society's sexualization of children, not to participate in it. He said the sexual abuse allegations were fabricated by parents who discovered the photos and misinterpreted Trevor's artistic intent, that children's testimony would show their memories were contaminated by leading questions from police. The argument was repulsive. Several jury members looked disgusted. Daniels seemed to realize his strategy was failing but doubled down anyway, suggesting that contemporary art often pushed boundaries and that viewers uncomfortable with those boundaries should not criminalize the artist. Judge Melbourne looked ready to hold him in contempt. The jury clearly was not buying it. Linda Cho allowed herself a small smile. Trevor's defense was collapsing before testimony even began. The first witnesses were FBI digital forensics experts who explained Trevor's online activities. Agent Melissa Cruz walked the jury through encrypted communications between Trevor and other predators. She showed evidence of Trevor selling access to photos for cryptocurrency, of him discussing grooming techniques with other abusers, of him requesting specific types of content from international sources. The financial trail showed Trevor had earned over $200,000 selling exploitation material over 6 years. This was not artistic photography. This was commercial child exploitation. Agent Dennis Vaughn testified about the international distribution network Trevor participated in. He explained how Trevor's photos of local children ended up in collections worldwide, how identifying and removing the images was nearly impossible once distributed. He said investigators had identified Trevor's photos in the collections of arrested predators in 14 countries. Sophia's photos specifically were found on servers in Germany, Russia, and the Philippines. The scope was staggering. Trevor's crimes extended far beyond our family. Medical experts testified about evidence of sexual abuse. Dr. Patricia Wolfe, the forensic nurse who examined Sophia, explained her findings in clinical terms that still managed to convey the horror of what Trevor had done. She testified about physical indicators of repeated abuse, about psychological trauma markers, about how Sophia's injuries were consistent with her description of Trevor's actions. Trevor's attorney tried to suggest the injuries could have other causes, but Dr. Wolfe systematically destroyed each alternative explanation. The medical evidence was unambiguous. Sophia had been sexually abused over an extended period. The timing matched Trevor's documented access to her. Dr. Angela Reeves testified about her therapy work with Sophia, describing symptoms consistent with sexual abuse trauma. She explained how children process abuse, why they often do not disclose immediately, why they might continue interacting normally with their abuser due to grooming. She said Sophia's testimony would be credible not despite inconsistencies, but because inconsistencies were normal when children recalled traumatic events. Then came victim testimony. Other children went first to establish pattern. A 13-year-old girl named Rachel Carpenter described how Trevor photographed her starting when she was 8 during portfolio building sessions her parents paid for. She explained how the sessions gradually became inappropriate, how Trevor made her feel mature and special, how he eventually sexually abused her while claiming it was part of artistic exploration of the human body. Her parents sat in the gallery crying. A 10-year-old boy named Lucas Huang testified about Trevor photographing him at family events before suggesting private sessions. Lucas described feeling confused about whether what happened was okay, about Trevor telling him other kids did this too, about being scared to tell because Trevor said no one would believe him. The testimony was devastating and repetitive, showing Trevor's methods were consistent across victims. He groomed, isolated, abused, threatened, then discarded children when they aged out of his preference range or became too risky to continue accessing. By the time Sophia took the stand, the jury had heard enough to understand Trevor's pattern completely. Sophia was terrified, but determined. Linda Cho questioned her gently, walking her through her relationship with Uncle Trevor, the photography sessions, the progression from normal to inappropriate. Sophia's voice was small but clear. She described how Trevor made her feel special, how he gave her gifts and attention, how the photos started normally before becoming weird. She said Trevor told her the photos were art, that famous photographers worked with child models, that her parents would not understand, but that she was mature enough to participate in something sophisticated. She described Trevor touching her in ways that felt wrong, but that he insisted were normal. She started crying when describing specific incidents of abuse. Judge Melbourne called a recess. I held Sophia in the hallway while she sobbed. Leslie tried to approach, but Sophia turned away. When we returned, Roger Daniels began cross-examination. Linda Cho had warned me it would be difficult to watch. Daniels tried to be gentle given Sophia's age, but his questions were designed to undermine her credibility. He asked if Sophia was certain about dates and times. She said not always. He pointed out inconsistencies between her testimony and earlier statements to police. He suggested her parents had coached her to describe things in certain ways. Sophia got confused and upset. Linda Cho objected repeatedly, arguing Daniels was badgering a child witness. Judge Melbourne sustained many objections, but allowed the cross-examination to continue within limits. Daniels asked if anyone ever directly told Sophia that what Trevor did was wrong before police got involved. She said no, that Trevor told her it was fine, and she believed him. Daniels said, "So you did not think it was abuse at the time?" Sophia stared at him, trapped by the question. Linda Cho redirected after cross, clarifying that children cannot consent even if they do not understand they are being abused, that grooming specifically works by making abuse seem normal. The jury seemed angry at Daniels for his tactics. Several members looked at Trevor with open disgust. Sophia was dismissed. She ran from the courtroom. I caught her outside and carried her to the car where she buried her face in my shoulder and cried for 20 minutes. The defense case was weak. Roger Daniels called art experts who testified about controversial photography involving children, arguing Trevor's work fit within established artistic traditions. Linda Cho destroyed them on cross-examination, getting each expert to admit they had not actually reviewed Trevor's full collection, that images depicting sexual abuse of children were not protected artistic expression, that selling access to exploitation material was clearly criminal, regardless of artistic intent. Trevor's parents testified character witnesses, describing him as a loving son and brother who would never hurt children. Linda Cho asked Gerald if he knew his brother had molested his children. Gerald admitted he knew. She asked why he never reported it. Gerald said it was handled within the family. She asked if he now recognized that not reporting allowed the cycle of abuse to continue to his grandchildren. Gerald had no answer. Trevor chose not to testify. His attorney explained this was to avoid self-incrimination, but to the jury, it looked like he was hiding. The defense rested after only 3 days. Closing arguments were emotional. Linda Cho presented Trevor as exactly what evidence proved: a sophisticated predator who exploited family connections, professional cover, and societal discomfort with confronting abuse to victimize children for years. She walked through evidence methodically, connecting Trevor's journals to his actions, his photos to victim testimony, his financial records to the distribution network. She said the case was not complicated, despite defense attempts to muddy it with arguments about art. Trevor had sexually abused children and profited from distributing exploitation material. The jury's job was to hold him accountable. Roger Daniels made a final attempt to cast doubt, suggesting the prosecution relied on emotional manipulation rather than evidence, that artistic expression was being criminalized because it made people uncomfortable. He said reasonable doubt existed about whether Trevor intended abuse or was exploring challenging themes. The argument fell flat. The jury looked skeptical. Deliberations began that afternoon. The verdict came back in less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Trevor showed no reaction. His mother collapsed, sobbing. Gerald sat frozen. Leslie grabbed my hand. I felt nothing but exhaustion. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. The judge allowed victim impact statements. I spoke about watching my daughter's childhood end, about picking up pieces of her shattered sense of safety, about the lifelong trauma Trevor inflicted for profit. Other parents spoke about similar devastation. Some victims who were older spoke for themselves about damage that would follow them forever, about violated trust and stolen innocence. Trevor sat expressionless through it all. When Judge Melbourne finally spoke, her voice carried steel. She said Trevor's crimes represented calculated exploitation of the most vulnerable, that his use of family connections made his actions more heinous, not less, that his complete lack of remorse demonstrated continued danger. She sentenced him to 60 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 40. Trevor would die behind bars. She ordered restitution to all victims, though the amounts could never adequately compensate for harm done. She said her only regret was that the sentence could not be longer. Officers led Trevor away. He did not look back at his family. I felt Sophia's hand in mine and thought maybe we could begin healing now that justice was served. 3 years later, Sophia will be 13 next month and laughs sometimes, though shadows remain behind her eyes. We moved to a different state for a fresh start where nobody knows our story. Leslie and I divorced quietly because some bridges cannot be rebuilt. She sees Sophia on supervised visits every other weekend, and they are slowly reconstructing something that will never be what it was, but might eventually be functional. I remarried someone who knows everything and loves Sophia fiercely. We had another daughter who gives Sophia joy and purpose. Trevor is in maximum security federal prison, where other inmates learned what he did and made his life appropriately miserable. His appeals were all denied. Other predators from his network have been arrested and convicted, dozens of children rescued from ongoing abuse. Sophia speaks at victim advocacy events sometimes, helping other survivors find their voice. She is not defined by what happened, but shaped by how she survived it. Last week, she said she wants to become a prosecutor to protect kids the way Linda Cho protected her, and I believed she will do exactly that because my daughter is stronger than any monster who tried to break her. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.